Hello again, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Fun and Games Podcast. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I am Matt A.K. Stormageddon.
And you're listening to episode 121. And this episode, we are joined by one of the wonderful, deranged, creative people responsible for Berserk Studio's Infernax, Hunter Bond. Mr. Bond, thank you for being on the show.
Oh, of course. Thanks for having me on.
We have to give a quick shout out to previous guest of the show, Josh Silverman, for making this happen and connecting us. Appreciate that. Human. Hunter, thank you for joining us. I just have to say right off the bat, I am obsessed with this goddamn game. I've been obsessed with it since I first played it on a couch at PAX 2020 and had been looking forward to it. But like, since I've gotten it in my hands, I was telling Geoff before we started recording, though we're not going to go far into story spoilers, I am in the final dungeon. I have made it there. I've done the side quests. Like, I just couldn't put this damn thing down. So thank you for joining us. The first thing I wanted to ask is, we've not had a lot of writers on the show when it comes to games writing. And so I'm curious, what is that like, especially for an indie game? This has, you know, some text, but not as much text as like a modern game because it's meant to ape a Nintendo game.
Right.
What's the writing process like for trying to put this kind of thing together? Is it more storyboarding until you build out the dialogue, or is it kind of a little all over the place?
This one in particular, you guys get the scoop because we had only one other podcast has really ever asked any like specific writing questions, and it was both Mike and I, so we didn't have the chance to kind of get deep into any of it. But I have a bunch of interesting stuff that I haven't gotten to talk about
Excellent.
the writing of it. Yeah.
Yes.
So part of it is Infernax is an old game, right? The bones of it are 11 years old. That like they started it 11 years ago, and it started as like a weekend project that was like a flash game. So the scope of it was much shorter, obviously. The goal was to be shorter too. And the reason it didn't actually get put out was because they didn't have in mind back in the day, right? There would flash games licensing existed where a company would pay for you to put their logo or name at the beginning of your game, and that would pay you to make the flash game. And that's what Berserk did for a long time, long time. Well, no one wanted to buy the really bloody Zelda 2, Castlevania 2 side-scrolling platformer flash game. No one wanted to put their name on it, weirdly.
Shocking.
Yeah. So they kind of shelved it for a long time and stuff, and then picked it back up in like 2015, kind of polished it a little, and that's when the Kickstarter happened. But they kind of made the Kickstarter, I don't know what to say, it wasn't a joke, right? But they definitely set it with like a really low Kickstart goal, which... I'm not, we've talked about it a lot, and I think part of it was they just weren't really sure how to use Kickstarter back then as a studio. So they didn't raise enough money to bridge the gap between the game that it really should be for people who had Kickstarted it and the game that it was at the time. And so we did something I don't know that anyone else has ever done, which is we went back and manually refunded every single person who Kickstarted our game, except for like one penny so that they would still be a backer. And so every single person who backed the game got all their money back, except we gave them the game too. Like we sent them codes when the game launched. And if you play through it, you'll see there's like a backer mausoleum still. Like all the things, for the most part, there's a handful of things we couldn't leave in. But most of the things, like people who paid to have their name, and their names are still in the game. They're in there, So anyway, by the time I joined the project, which was when I joined Berserk, I've been there a little over 3 years as an employee now. Before that, I was their friend helping them run the booth and everything. When I joined, they hadn't picked it up in forever, and I remember having a conversation with Mike, who you've met. He's the other one who is going to be at PAX East, about how it was cursed, basically, at that point, because every single time they thought maybe they would work on it, they thought, okay, well, we can't do Kickstarter, so instead we're going to make a game called Untitled, which is an idle game, and that'll fund the development for Infernax. Well, that did great, and then it ended up funding the development for Just Shapes and Beats. And Just Shapes and Beats did great, so it kind of took the focus for years off of doing anything with Infernax, and that's kind of when I started, about 6 months after JSB launched. And I remember being like, Zelda 2 is my personal favorite Zelda game. I don't really care if people don't like that. It's just how I roll. It was the first Zelda game I owned, too. Yeah, I never owned Zelda 1 until I was like a teenager. I owned Zelda 2, though, on NES when I was like 5 and couldn't beat it, right? But I owned it, and I love it. So when I was on the project, originally it was like, this is never going to happen. And every year Berserk has a family dinner where we all hang out and celebrate the anniversary of the studio, which means I fly up to Quebec, except for the last couple of years, obviously. And during one of those, I talked to Etienne, who's the creative director and the main artist on the game and one of the co-founders of Berserk. And just, we were just talking about the timing just sort of worked out really well because The Messenger had just come out and they're really good friends of the studio. And he sort of was able to like be like he always wanted to finish it. That wasn't really that it wasn't gonna. It's just the timing was always bad, and then just everything came together where he needed to stop working on Zombital because it was gonna make him go insane because they did bi-weekly content updates for years, which is insane. And so the Messenger came out. He needed a break from Zombital. JSB was kind of wrapping up, and so everyone was able to like throw onto Infernax, and we rushed and made that PAX demo. And that kind of started the direction the game ended up in at the very end, because before the PAX demo, those decision points, at one point we called it the fate system. Really, it's the morality system of the game, right? That was added kind of in like a fugue state for Simon, one of the lead coders and one of the other co-founders. He just added it in because he thought it would be cool to that Unity PAX demo that we made for the first showing, and everyone loved it. And so we were like, wow, we should like flesh that out. And that's how I ended up writing on the game, is because originally I was doing some copy editing because I have a background in copy editing and writing because I also do marketing. And I'm one of the only native English speakers because the rest of the team are French Canadian. So they all speak English, of course, but there's a lot of like weird idioms the nuance of English is weird, right?
Which is funny to think on like a retro throwback game, the nuance of language in a pixel game.
Right,
but
yeah. We could have left it wrong, and it would have also been kind of like authentic, right? Because the kind of things that I was copy editing for were tenses and like, really specific stuff. And of course, now having seen everyone play it to death, I saw a few stuck through, and I was like, oh, God, like I was so close. I almost got the hat trick. So writing on it was an interesting process because I was coming into a game that was already 11 years old and was currently changing. And part of how I became a writer officially on it was that as we added that fate system, the original game didn't have multiple playthroughs. It was one game. And so the script needed to expand quite a bit because it branches all those different divides. And every single time you add a new thing, it's like, well, this quest has 3 outcomes now. And it needs a branching, text for each thing. But there was, as you said, a direction from the top down of, like, you'll notice if you look for it, that in the game, it's very rare, with a couple of exceptions, that you have to listen to most NPCs talk for more than 2 blocks of text. It's almost doesn't happen very much. And that was on purpose. The creative director felt really strongly about that. And that was one of the biggest challenges of the game, is conveying information it's like about 120 characters, I think, is like the text box Mac, including spaces. So you really got to be economical. And there were times where it meant I spent like 4 hours rewriting the single line because it had to accomplish so many things in just a couple of words. So like writing it wasn't really so much a storyboarding process, because the overarching, like the quests and the story of the game were pretty established from the very beginning, right? That was from creative down. But like the things that we spent a lot of time working on were, when you play the game, depending on your morality, obviously, but generally speaking, people are respectful to you. Like they treat you like the Lord because you are. And that's challenging, actually. Like that ended up being probably the hardest part of writing at all, overarching, is how do you write a game where these NPCs are like your vassals? So they have to be nice, but they are giving you quests. So it's like more of everyone has to request your service. No one can be like, go get my boots. It's like, excuse me, my lord, would you please do me the, like trying to make it
and
so
then
that
make that concise.
Right, of course. And keeping in those, it was much easier to write the evil dialogue, for instance, because cultists or evil people, they don't have to respect you. They're cultists. Yeah. So it was much easier. Whereas the guards, a really challenging one, if you play the game, was, and Etienne and I went back and forth on this a bunch, was trying to nail it, is how do you convey to the player the reason they can't get a quest from this guard right now is not because they need to wait time-wise, it's that they have not accomplished enough good tasks for their reputation to be good enough. How do you convey all of that in a single line? Because he's like, one line. You got to do it in one line. And it's like something like, like, pardon my lord, like, please come back when you've done more good deeds. And that's not as nuanced as they wanted it to be, but it's as close as you could get with the, it works. It implies that you don't need to come back later, which was the problem we had in testing, is people were thinking, oh, I just need to go switch it from day to night, which is not what it was. It was a morality gate where it's like, oh, you haven't done enough good tasks, or you're too evil for this quest, right? But yeah, the craziest part about writing it, and this one makes all of my friends who do game writing, like they can't deal with it, is I live wrote the script in front of the creative director over a stream.
Wow.
Yeah, because like we tried collaborating, like by me writing and then just sending him a script. And because because of the nuance of language and like because I would choose words specifically for specific reasons, not like always having to go back and explain to him like the script of the game is written very strangely too. A lot of other companies, I'm sure, use like a better system of putting into an Excel spreadsheet or something that's a little more editable. I had to learn some C# code because it's actually in a code editor. Like that's part of why a couple of things struck.
Wow.
Yeah, is I wrote all the dialogue directly into the game code because that's how it was built. It's a little gnarly. So like doing it live with Etienne on a call ended up being the easiest way to collaborate because in the moment, if I wanted to like, if he didn't like a wording, but I was able to say like, well, hold on, let me tell you exactly why. We had that back and forth the whole time for every single line, which seems crazy, but the proof's in the pudding, right? I think the writing came out pretty good, and he felt like we got to where he wanted to be with the tone of the game.
Yeah, for the first time ever, this email was better as a meeting.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, part of it too is like Mike, who's not able to make it to this one today, is the co-writer on the game. And so is everybody. I actually kind of bring that up a lot where it's like, I can't take credit for all the writing on the game. That'd be super disingenuous because, for instance, when they were coding it, sometimes like Simon or one of the other coders like Kojak or FX, they would block in the code for a new section, right? Here's the new quest line and here's and sometimes the blocked in text would be like funny or like really good. And I was like, why rewrite something that someone else did that's good, right? Like I'm not a like tyrant. There's all kinds of stuff in the game that came from everybody who contributed to the game. I was just responsible for making sure that it like stayed cohesive because Mike wrote all the old dialogue and we didn't scrap most of that. That stayed in the game too, right? So everyone wrote on Infernax a little bit. I was just responsible for making sure it like all hung together, which was a lot.
I said something to a friend of mine the other day who is just getting into the Yakuza series, which I've been in love with. I played the entire mainline series. I haven't played Like a Dragon yet, but I did all of Kiryu Kazuma's story over the last year and a half. This game, tone-wise, reminds me of Yakuza because the main story is absolutely serious. There's very little tongue-in-cheek. There are moments, but then you break a wall, find some green wall chicken, and you're like, well, it's a Castlevania game. I should eat this. And then it's a splash screen of you vomiting everywhere and going, maybe I shouldn't have eaten chicken from a wall, which is hilarious. And it's just that tongue-in-cheek of turning on its heel to comedy. But the main character is still very much 100% serious.
There were some times we thought about that too, where, early on, you might know this about writers, but they really like usually making jokes. And, retro games in general tend to lean more humorous. And the choice to keep it serious in a lot of cases was, again, from Etienne, where, I remember being sad because I wanted to write a bunch of goofy jokes. And he was like, no, I want the game to be serious, right? Like, not super, super serious, but like dark humor serious, at least. And he's right, though, right? Those moments shine better because the rest of the game isn't goofy. If it was just joke, then those moments would be like, yeah, okay, it's another joke, versus it being a moment of like, all right, fair enough. I shouldn't eat that. Like, you got me.
I mean, to be fair, I feel like video games as a medium is unique in how much you can put things like that. And if people go looking for it, they'll discover it. And it's a conversation that goes on there. I had a moment while playing through the game. I got into this game purely on Matt's word, and thank you, Matt. I ordered the limited run physical copy, sight unseen, and
nice.
I cannot wait till it's in my hands.
Yeah.
But playing through it, and I grew up, I had Zelda 2, I had Castlevania 2, I have a lot of love for those games, and I recognized a point where I went, wait a minute. This looks like a spot where you would bang your head against the wall in Castlevania 2 by kneeling down. I'm just going to try it. There's no enemies. I'm going to kneel down. And in Castlevania 2, a tornado comes up and takes you along the quest that you need to go. Lo and behold, a tornado came up. And then I died horribly. And it explains that maybe he shouldn't have just jumped into that tornado that came through.
Right.
And I loved it. And no one could accidentally find that. The chicken is green and putrid. You can't accidentally get into it. And there's little consequence to it other than amusement.
I think it's funny because people bring that up all the time where it's like, how was I supposed to know? And something we talked about internally is like, I don't know. I guess it just should be logical, right? That you shouldn't eat green chicken. Yeah. Like, it seems that's why it was funny.
But it's video game logic.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is, like, it's green. To me, in my brain, it's like, it's green because the wall was green, right? Limited color palette. We're aping the Nintendo style. But no, it's green because it's putrid rancid chicken that you shouldn't eat. And, like, it's just on those levels. I really love the design of this game. The music is incredible. So you may not know this, Hunter, but our audience does. We are giant Shovel Knight nerds. We talk about it constantly.
Cool. Okay. Yeah, I got to meet those guys really early on in the development of it because I used to work at Jinx, the clothing company, and they were showing at Minecon one year when Minecraft had those conventions. They gave them a little booth space. So I met Sean Velasco of Yacht Club like really early on in Shovel Knights. So I've been following it forever. I'm a huge fan.
And like, so Geoff and I are big retro game fans. And so I like any game that apes retro style because that's what I grew up with. But when a game, and I've talked about this before with Shovel Knight, Time Spinner, and a few other games like Infernax, all look like Nintendo games or Super Nintendo games, but they go beyond what those consoles could do. And that's my favorite way to interact with these games. And so like, I love that Infernax has definitely a more complex color palette than the Nintendo would have, but doesn't feel that way. And like from the way that the health is designed to the way you attack, like you can definitely do things that in Zelda 2 and Castlevania 2 you could never do, but it still gives the vibe of that. Geoff likes to say it's like how we remember these games being. Like we remember them being more mystical than they were.
And less obtuse.
Right. Yeah. Way less obtuse. What's funny for me about Infernax is it's a game, like it's based on games that I hated growing up. Like I was bad at Zelda 2 and I was bad at Castlevania 2. And then when the Castlevania collection came out, I was still bad at Castlevania 2.
It's an incredibly hard game. So,
It is.
But then playing this, I discovered, okay, this can be punishing, but there are two things. The company, it's got the learning curve that like a lot of modern Metroids have, where like if you play the bosses over and over again, you can learn their patterns. It's not
pattern-based,
It's not impossible. But my favorite thing, and I tweeted about this, it has accessibility options from the get. You give splash warnings of like, this could ruin this or that, but if you don't care, go for it. And if you don't want any aesthetic spoilers, I guess, skip ahead a few minutes. But like when you pull it up, it is literally like, it's not sort of, it's literally Game Genie pretty much, like from tone to style.
Although it's legally distinct from Game Genie.
Of course,
Wizard.
It's Game Wizard. But like,
it was already its own legally murky thing. So this is a copy of a copy. I love it.
But like, it made me feel so good because I had a Nintendo Game Genie where you had to put it on the front of the game and then push it in, and it just
never really worked quite right, and it was always really, really precarious. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But like, I love that y'all included that, but then also included language to explain, look, you can use this, and we encourage you to use it. We're not even going to punish you, take away achievements, none of that. But it's like, and I love that because I'm someone who will play a game until I get it, unless I hit a wall that I can't learn through. And that happened halfway through the game. Okay. And I used it, got past that wall, and then didn't really use it much after that.
Right.
And I love that. Was that always, do you know if the team always wanted something like that just to make sure that this game could be played by anyone?
I mean, so I'm a huge proponent for it personally. I think everyone on the team wants everyone who can enjoy a game to have the chance to. Like no one was against it at all.
Right.
I know that was a really big thing for me. Like accessibility is always on my mind in games. My mom's deaf, so like that's something that comes to mind pretty often for me is like, is there a way to accommodate things that you wouldn't necessarily think about that you need, right? But would be pivotal in the difference between somebody, like you said, like you're a retro gamer, your experience. Also, like I'm a 35-year-old dude, right? Like if I hit a wall at a game long enough, like, I respect the hell out of people who can bang their head against it till they beat it. That's awesome. That doesn't give me the same level of satisfaction as it used to when I had more free time. And I do want to finish games. Like the one that, it's of course it's the one everyone says, but Celeste was amazing, right? They did such a good job. And we all appreciated the idea of like non-judgmental accessibility, right? Because like what's the point? I mean, it's a hard game already. Like even in casual mode, Infernax is it's pretty hard.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I'm the one who monitors like Steam forums and stuff, and I saw it come up a couple of times since launch where people are saying like, oh well, you shouldn't be able to get the achievements while using the Game Genie codes. And I was kind of had to explain that like, well, the accessibility is like a subset of those codes, which is why it doesn't disable achievements in the game, is because we would never disable achievements behind accessibility features because that's crazy.
Yeah.
Right.
But furthermore, like the accomplishment of beating it for hardcore mode, I've never really personally understood the idea that you can't also technically have this achievement because achievements are just blips, right? Like you should feel cool about having done it the way you did it. You don't need me to like create a little digital chit to tell you, like, right? So I'm not a huge fan of the, get good in that way. Like, I understand that whole debate too with like, it's a fair point that like adding accessibility to a game like Dark Souls would have been hard because of the way it's done. Not impossible though, right? It's just not something they had considered at the time. And now that we're in the future, if there is a way to accommodate it, I don't really see why you wouldn't, I guess, right? Like, so the whole team's behind that. I just was talking to them today, and, we put fairly basic accessibility stuff in, and part of that's because that's what we were able to work in to the game as it was built, since, of course, it predates accessibility features by quite a bit. But we're actually going to go back and rework that system to have more options because, even though we provided some, we want more, basically.
I love that. I think it shows a foresight for a game that like, and there are tons of indie games that I've loved that I just put down because I couldn't get further. And like, I'm the same way. Like, we're all around the same age. And I think like when we were kids, we talk about this on the show all the time. You had 3 games growing up. You played those 3 games until you were tired of them. And then you played them some more because you didn't have any other games.
You're not going to get another game for like 9 months, probably, if you're lucky, right? That'd be great.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is now, as someone, especially us, very loosely using the term game journalists, like we have access to stuff and we're playing stuff for interviews. And it's like Infernax, I probably would have finished even if I wasn't even here speaking to you today, Hunter, because I'm enjoying it so much. But like, that said, there are tons of other games that I've picked up for interview purposes and played like the first, 4 hours and get the gist and then talk about it and then never go back to. Like, I loved Grape Story. Which I got, Garden Story, rather, which the main character is a grape, which I loved. And I played for like 4 hours and we were supposed to do an interview. It ended up getting pushed off and we're still probably going to do it at some point. But like, I never went back to it because I was like, well, it was great, but I don't have time. I got to do these other 10 things. And
it's hard to justify that time, and that's part of it too, is I respect people. One of my best friends is a guy named Steve, who is in every possible way you can be better at gaming than me. He is all of those, right? He's better at every game. And it's like, it's comical actually, because he's a super nice dude. And his main hobby, right? His main only hobby really is games. But his prowess extends beyond just being really good at video games into, I can't beat him at like a board game, and I'm like an avid tabletop gamer. I will teach him a game he'll beat me at, right? I'll be like, here's the Rivals of Waterdeep, and then he just destroys me in his first playthrough, and you're like, and it's not even close. And you're just like, so like, I respect the Steves of the world, right? Who are out there just crushing game after game because they're amazing at it. I'm all right at most games, right? Like I'm not embarrassingly bad at, no one should be embarrassed to be bad about games. Let me just say that right there, right? Games are for fun. Sure. Enjoy them. Otherwise, what's the point? But I have a level of prowess where I feel like I can approach most games with some competence. But I don't feel the need to defend myself as far as being like great at them, right? Like I didn't beat Cuphead. I got pretty far through Cuphead. It's really good. Same thing, right? I was like, I'll come back to it. Will I one day. Sure. I really want to. It's great. It's an awesome game. I didn't stop playing because it's bad. I just had to do my taxes because adulthood is garbage.
That's fair.
Yeah.
And actually the fact that those accessibility options are there and the fact Infernax is not built to be a very long game is, I'm somebody that I haven't finished the game yet because I've been playing it on classic difficulty because I know it's not going to be like tens and tens of hours, so I'm very content to have died a lot and to have done those things and go at it like that. But I think also having those accessibility options and the ability to make it work for your time, for your patience, for your skill, for everything else, also proves to the fact that, again, the three of us all being very similar in age, games of the NES era, it's like, we only think they're good because we grew up with them, or, they were hard, but they weren't this and that. This shows that a game of a certain design, of a certain aesthetic, can still evoke an older idea and still be a good game, a great game.
When we were doing the early press circuit for Infernax and showing it at shows and stuff, and I'm sure I probably told Matt this because I used to have like the shortest possible pitch for Infernax was like, what if Castlevania 2 and Zelda 2 were good games? Which is not a fair statement because I actually think they're decent games, but they get a lot of flack. Yeah. Understandably so, right? Because both of
culturally
them are
good.
Yeah, they're just weird sequels too, as part of it, right? Like Zelda 2 is like this strange diversion where they were like, well, we've got a top-down adventure game. All right, guys, here's what we're going to do. They're going to have a top-down part. It's going to be kind of obtuse and we're not going to explain it. But then you're going to go into side-scrolling elements. Also, there's RPGs and there's spells. And like, we're going to basically make Metroid. It's all of this. And you're like, so that's the sequel to Zelda? Everyone got mad because, of course, what a weird sequel. It's a real Mario 2, right? Where everyone's like, hold on. Like it's a real stealth Doki Doki Panic, but it's a good game. It's just really hard, right? It doesn't, and it's not going to directly appeal to fans of Zelda 1 necessarily, because other than lore, they're not really the same game, right? They don't play the same. They don't use the same skill set, and you see that with Link to the Past, where they were like, "Oh, we've got to course correct," and they went right back to making basically what you would have expected as a sequel to Zelda, right? Which is a top-down game where you go through dungeons. They went back, and so. Yeah. All the cool stuff, Zelda 2, everyone just became like a meme to make fun of it, right? Zelda 2, Castlevania 2, because they both have problems.
And it's easy to forget that there was actually a lot of NES titles that did things similarly to that. You have your Xanadu's and Battle of Olympus. Crystalis, even though it was top-down, still had that idea of like, talk to this random person. Maybe there's a quest involved. And like the action RPG idea of the NES had a lot of experiments and just, Zelda 2 and Castlevania 2 just kind of become the public face.
Yeah, they're the one that's like cool to make fun of, right? And it's funny because that's fair. There's parts. I mean, there's some really hateful parts of Castlevania 2. The fact that NPCs straight up lie to you in the game is gnarly, especially at that point in games when like, what?
amidst the localization that is totally beyond reproach.
Right, of course. And so like there's so many things about them though that are interesting. And I think that it's like throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because I'm a really, really unrepentant retro gamer. I have like a bunch of CRT TVs. I have a bunch of arcade cabinets and stuff.
Hell yeah.
I can't be saved, and that's fine. But I'll be the first one to be like, most NES games are bad. Like a lot of them, like about 70% or more are not great because they had, game design was still in its like early infancy. You had like tons and tons of games developed by all kinds of different teams with varied levels of experience and stuff. There's so many games that like are interesting, but like you look at a game like Clash at Demon Head, where you're like, the gameplay of this is interesting, but the sound will make you want to drill your ears out so that you don't have to listen to the like 5-second background music loop, right? What a weird game design choice. I don't know, man. It was a long time ago.
I think with the strength of Infernax is not just its design, not just that it's aping something, but doing it better. But I think the heart and soul that's put into it, like when I first started playing it, I was like, okay, there's some choices and like it's a lot of action and like I'm not going to care about the, I've played Castlevania. Sure. Like I may or may not care about this character, but it'll be fun to be in this world. But I genuinely started caring about the characters, like the head of the knights in the main town, like the head priest, like the characters, even with not a lot of space to flesh out dialogue, have personality and are characters you become attached to. When you were writing dialogue for some of these characters, was that kept in mind? Like, how do I make this character feel like
I absolutely
they are individuals?
Kept being like, why do I care about this guy though? Like, 'cause there's some parts in the game where like, in the really early on, there's a part where I think it's fair. It's not really a big spoiler to say Father Henry is like one of the main characters of the games. You meet him like immediately, right?
Yeah.
And he has an assistant, Julius, and his role in the game, Julius, like is in the story too, right? And for a long time, he have lines and stuff, and we talked about how it's like, well, if this guy doesn't say anything, he doesn't really matter, right? He just exists. So like we had to make an effort to make it so that if you interact with the character, especially repeatedly, that they like matter somewhat, that they leave some sort of impression one way or the other. Of course, doing it in all caps on 120 characters, quite limiting, but it makes me happy to hear that like it worked somewhat. I got a similar report from another friend who was playing, and he's like, oh, I beat the game. I'm doing an evil run now, but I hate it because I feel terrible like all the time.
Yes!
It feels so bad. And I was like, good, that was the goal. I wanted you to feel terrible, right?
As soon as I realized there was like a deep moral system going on here, and it's introduced very early on. First guy you run into, I'm a monster, kill me, and you decide. But like from there, I was just like, oh no, I have to be good. I have to be.
Well, I mean, and it's funny because I got to tell you, probably some of the funniest, like, most gnarly lines in the game are down the evil path for sure. Like, I wrote some stuff in there that's pretty metal, and you only get to see that if you go evil. And mechanically, the game does, change if you're evil enough, like further down the line. But yeah, it was definitely like important to be like, a conversation. A good example of like the part of the writing that I brought, the quests and a lot of the general stuff, Father Henry, they existed to some extent before I even got involved. But really basic stuff like, what's this place called? Like, what's it like where we are right now? What's it called? And they hadn't written that. And like when you jump off the boat, right, it says Shores of Upel. And I was like, well, logically, this is Upel then, right? Like that's where we are. Where we are. And like, there were a lot of other choices where like really small things. So there's Valeshire Keep, right? Which is, well, Valeshire is like a part, right? So we started like going through the game and I was like, okay, well, so you're in this area and it's called Valeshire. And then there's like the keep used to have a different name. And I was like, so shouldn't it be the same name though? Cause you're like here and it's the keep for this area. Like those kinds of like, I don't know if you ever notice them, but you would notice them if they were wrong is one of the, right. Yes. Like a lot of effort went into like stuff that hopefully you just never notice, like 70% of the stuff I did because it just sits in the background and facilitates playing the game, right? Where the writing's not terrible, doesn't stick out, it's not hard to follow. You don't have to like listen to really long soliloquies. It just is like, all right, there's some demons and they need to die. Get back in the action. Like, there you go. Like that was definitely.
Yeah, this isn't Elder Scrolls. This is just facilitating what you're doing. And
but it makes me happy that you cared, right? Like part of that too is like, if you choose to do morally evil things, if you don't characterize people, then it's easier to just not care. So like if you make them someone that's sympathetic even a little bit, you start to feel worse, which is absolutely on purpose.
There you go.
Yeah, I mean, I'm known for being a Mass Effect fan online. I have a Mass Effect podcast. And like one of the only complaints that I will ever levy and actually hold up as fair from the internet, because it's the internet, is a lot of folks go, well, you and your co-host are Paragon to a fault. You only do the good stuff. And I go, I know, because I feel bad, right? But we bring on guests who have no problem being renegade and putting a gun in someone's mouth. But like, there's an opening moment, and I think it's fair to spoil this because
also everything's online for the demo and stuff. All the first 30 or so minutes of the game are like really tied out at this point. Yeah.
But it's open at this point.
The first demon you fight, Paimon, like there's a guy who's like, help me, kill me, and. the first time I will be 100% honest, I had to start the game over. I had to delete my save because in that first moment you can either help him, which then it doesn't help and he still transforms and you have to fight him, or you kill him. And the pixel art and the like painting with pixels is so gorgeous for the cutscenes, but when you smack him with that mace and he just crumples, I felt so bad, and I was like, I have to start over. I can't do this.
That line is the one he says after that. If you make that choice, is the very first line I ever wrote for the game, actually, because it's super melodramatic, right? And the coder and I worked together. Kojak, one of the coders, and I worked on that scene together because it was for the demo. And they were like, oh, yeah, you know what I did is if you choose that, because, in the game, you get covered with blood. There's like there's a system. Yeah. It's like counting ticks and stuff. And if you stand there, it goes away. Like there's a whole blood system.
The blood
But
stains.
if you do that one, we just 999, like max it out as much possible blood as you can get on your sprite for that one. Yeah.
It's just, and it made me feel bad. And so I started over. I mean, I've talked about this. I did the same thing in Undertale. I accidentally killed Goat Mom and then went back and the game called me on my bullshit. They're like, we know what you did.
Right.
Like,
Which, given nowadays, the look of a game belies nothing about how complex the systems under the hood are. And I've definitely run into a lot of moments playing through Infernax where I'm essentially like, I feel like I'm supposed to be helping these people, but is there ulterior motives? I played enough Castlevania games where the establishment was secretly evil. I'm just going to go with it.
My favorite is that early on too, I've had some friends and people talking to me and be like, well, how was I supposed to know that I shouldn't do that? And I'd be like, well, I would say a good thing is that there's a guy standing right next to it you could talk to, and he would tell you a thing that if you read what he said, he would inform you that what you were thinking about doing might have consequences. I mean, I'm not, like, I don't know, maybe I'm biased because I wrote what he said, but there is a guy right there. We did put him right there.
I mean, I got into a new town, started talking to everybody I could because that's what you do in these games, or at least that's what I do, and found out about some, local things that are really good, and then talked to somebody else. And if I talked to that person first, they asked me to do something. And the way they asked, it was sort of, this seems suspicious.
A little weird.
But I'd already talked to someone else in town, and I was like, no, I don't want to do this based on what I want. And it's there if you look for it.
Yeah.
It's the same as the Easter eggs.
Part of it is like, my favorite is that there's a quest, and I'm not going to say this one because it's later in and I don't want to spoil it, but there is a quest where if you apply standard, I guess not standard video game knowledge, but if you've played, for instance, a lot of Undertale, you might think that the choice is different than the choice that's being presented to you. And I've had a lot of people make a specific choice on this one and then later be like, how was I supposed to know that's what was going to happen? And the answer is, well, all the information that's been presented to you up until this point has informed you of the way that this world works, right? So you're reading into something that's not there, really, right?
Yeah.
Like there's, that joke about NPCs lying to you. None of the NPCs in the game lie to you about what will kill you, right? Like in Castlevania 2.
Yeah.
But people can lie to you somewhat in the game, right? Because there's morality. So like it's not entirely clear why they want something, but like I was joking with a friend. He's like, well, what's the easiest way to get the good ending? And I was like, I mean, I don't want to say you play him lawful stupid, but like you don't not play him lawful stupid, right? Where you think like, if I'm playing a lawful good paladin, like, would I even worry about this? Or would I just make the like, sorry, man, jaywalking is literally illegal. You got to go to jail, like paladin call, right? Like, yeah.
Now, having the ability to put a lot under the hood, make it like as interesting and as interconnected as you like, at what point do you then go, okay, that's enough quests. That's enough, because adding those in, it does flesh out the game and it does add for a bunch of things. At what point is it because then there's too many NPCs? Like, where's the line, I guess?
I think it's when you start to get in over your head with branching, right? And part of it was another thing we did towards the end, right? With every side quest, for instance, some of them more than others, but every one of them does actually matter. Like something happens, right? Like there aren't any, I mean, there's a couple of quests that if you don't take them, what happens is you don't get the gold for the reward, right? But generally speaking, like there are a lot of quests where if you complete them, the world state changes for good or bad, depending on how you chose to go about it. And it became really important to us that other than a handful of like, there are very few just go do this because I say so and nothing will happen other than you did the quest. There's not a ton of those because we wanted the choices to feel like it mattered one way or the other, as opposed to just being like, here's a sack full of golden XP, congrats. That person that you spoke to who you think is suspicious, for instance, choosing to or choosing not to do that, both of them have an effect, right? One of them is pretty immediate, definitely. And then the other one is like later. And it's funny how many people, and I know which one you're talking about, of course, right? A lot of people are like, how could I have foreseen this? Who could have known? And I was like, I don't know. I feel like it was lampshaded pretty well.
I feel like it was there. Yeah. No,
and like, or, there's a part a little before halfway through the game where some people have found themselves a little confused about a part of it being sort of cryptic or whatever. But what's interesting is most of the people who've gotten stuck in that place specifically, it was because it turns out they don't talk to NPCs. And I was like, well, you're probably not going to just guess this one, right? That's what the NPCs are for. They're placed pretty strategically on purpose to be like somewhat logical or in an interesting place where like you're going to learn something before that knowledge is useful, but you should talk to them. But yeah, like the to answer the question about how many quests is enough quests, enough that the world feels full and not so many that it feels like you're playing a pixelated Ubisoft game, right? Like somewhere in between. Not to dunk on Ubisoft, right? Open world games are cool for people who like them, and that's great. But like, you definitely can get lost in the weeds on a game where you open the map and you're like, wow, there are 40. Like, I just started and there's 45 things on this map.
My wife loves Assassin's Creed. Like the modern ones. She never played the OG. She's going back. And even for her, there comes a point in a line where she's like, well, this is just going to keep happening, isn't it? I'm not helping these people anymore. I've got shit to do.
I feel like, for me, the last one I played, I used to play in a pirate band, of course, because, everyone plays in a pirate band every now and then.
I was in a ska band. It's like the same
right.
thing.
Yeah. Well, it's like sea ska
exactly.
is basically what.
Essentially, yes.
We just had an accordion instead of a horn section.
There you go.
It's economical, damn it. You try giving equal pay to a 8-piece horn
Well, I mean,
section,
we were a 13-piece band, so it was already problematic. It was.
Oh, we gotta swap stories. Ooh.
But my favorite is Black Flag, right? Because it's like, of course sure. I want to play the boat sailing sea shanty Assassin's Creed, and I got a decent way through it. It's about halfway, but the thing that would make those games work for me, and of course, like Infernax is a game for me, essentially, right? I was lucky to get to join the team because, again, I got to come help wrap it up. It was already a lot of what it was going to be. But man, if there was a way in those games, those overworld games, to have like a toggle where you're like, this is just the mission critical stuff. If you only want to play the game from beginning to end and you don't want to grind, here's a toggle for it and all that stuff just disappears. I would love it. I'd beat every Assassin's Creed game because I can't.
Yeah, that's its own kind of accessibility. That's its own sort of like, if I have to spend 20 minutes sifting through these and being like, what's important, what isn't important, I'm going to have analysis paralysis over this.
Yeah, that's what I was about to say, is because, like, you know, like a couple of people who make video games, I'm pretty ADHD, and it becomes a problem of not even focus, but intimidation, right? Where you're like, wow, like,
100%.
You can't give me this many quests. You just can't do it. There's 45 things for me to choose from. And the only game I played that was an open world game that I did a lot of the side quests for was Spider-Man.
I was just going to say.
Same.
Because they were fun. They were pretty easy. The traversal was fun in of itself, right?
And they group it nicely.
Right. And so, like, I did it in a very dumb way, I think, to me, but I liked it, which was I was like, well, I'm going to find every one of these backpacks first, right? Because that seems pretty straightforward. I'm just going to get all these. And, of course, that turns out you get, like, a really cool suit that's just literally the only visual suit I use for the rest of the game.
Right.
But, like, it felt good, and you absolutely didn't need to do any of it, right? That worked pretty well. It was pretty clear what the mission critical stuff you needed to do was, other than, you know, discovering the towers and the fast travel locations. Right. You didn't really need to do any of that stuff if you didn't want to, right? Like, I played it on easy. Judge me all you want. It's fine. I play easy mode. Yeah.
So I've told the story before on the show, but it's context relevant. Like, I started playing a bunch of first-person shooters a few years ago because I thought, maybe I don't like them. And then it turned out, oh, no, I do. I just didn't play enough of them.
Okay.
But nothing turned me off to the new Wolfenstein game, the first of the new ones, faster than when I went to the difficulty, and the easiest difficulty was called like something like baby mode. I went, well, I'm not going to play this game now.
I'm too young
and
to
it's a bummer.
Yeah.
You know, and so, but
it's always been like that, right? So it's sort of like one of those things where like Doom and Wolfenstein have always had that sort of like,
I'm too young to die.
Come on,
all the way up to nightmare mode, hurt me plenty, not too rough, all those. Yeah, I remember.
But we can leave that in the past, I guess. Like, I mean, obviously, I am super pro a hard game.
Yeah.
You know, again, the Steves of the world need it. Trust me. Because when we talked about playing Spider-Man, he's like, oh, no, I beat it on like literally the hardest mode. And I was trying to ask him, like, what did you get out of that, right? Because I played it and like the fight system is cool and all, but like towards the later half of the game, it's really sort of like, I'm just trying to finish the game. Like, I enjoyed it, and he was like, no, man, every fight was hard. And I was like, see, it's so weird because to me that sounds stressful. Yeah. Like, because there's a lot of fights in that game. It's not Dark Souls. There's a lot of fights in that game, right? Because like an interesting thing that kind of shifted my perception on really hard games was early on in the pandemic, before my move out here, my girlfriend and I were living in like a 700 square foot condo, couldn't go outside. I was incredibly stressed out, right? It was the beginning of all this and like I wasn't dealing with it great. And I was like, I need to do something to like help calm myself down. And so this is really nerdy. I bought a heart monitor and started playing Bloodborne while wearing it.
That's a cool idea.
And so I was like, okay, so the goal is, because I'm bad at those games, I'm really bad at them.
Same.
To learn to play this game that I find frustrating and stressful while keeping my heart rate down. So, and I did it. I beat most of Bloodborne, actually, and I was able to go from averaging like 120 BPMs to going through stressful boss fights and like not even breaking a sweat. And so it was like a weird, nerdy kind of cognitive behavioral therapy thing.
Yeah.
Like a biofeedback. Yeah, it worked.
It gives you
a thing to
great. Focus on. It's awesome.
Yeah. Well, it was like the fight would be over, right? And I'd check and I'd be like, okay, yeah, like 80 BPM. Cool. Like I didn't raise a single beat. So there's a lot of value in finding like your relationship with difficulty for sure, right? Yeah. Because once you play, for instance, like what opened my eyes in Bloodborne is it seems like every fight is life and death, and it is to some extent. But once you get kind of comfortable, you realize like, wow, these guys are really slow, actually. Like a lot of these guys can't actually get me, right? I can actually juke my way through this entire area and not fight anybody. Wow, okay. But you have to calm down first.
If you panic, like you'll get swarmed easily.
Right, exactly. And I have that problem in a lot of games, right? Is where you start to fail and then you panic.
Yeah.
And that's what'll destroy you in a lot of those really, really, technical games is in that moment, you have to get it even more zen if possible. And of course, this is like transcending, like, luckily I don't have any problems with using like controllers and stuff. So like people who need more accessibility thing, that's an entirely new barrier to overcome. But as just someone who like gets stressed out really easy and has a pretty hard rule about not doing things optionally for fun that stress me out.
Yeah.
Like I just don't, I don't watch suspenseful movies because they don't bring me joy. I just get stressed out. Like, yeah. So finding that is like super important, I think. I don't know. It meant a lot to me to have that interaction during like playing that way. It opened my eyes, I think, a lot to the value of not necessarily it being good or bad, but finding your own relationship to it.
For sure. And like, I like to be challenged. I mean, like the newest Metroid kicked my ass, but I love that franchise, but it kicked my ass in a different way. And I think bringing it back to Infernax, I think that's what the boss battles in Infernax do really well, that most good Metroidvanias do, is every time you die to a boss, it's not, oh, I hit the same problem. It's, oh, I found a new problem. Oh, I got halfway through the boss battle and now he's got a new move, but now I've learned that move. Like you're slowly learning on each death. And I think Infernax's design is really set up that way where like you could hit your head against the wall. And like, I'm not even going to spoil it, but there's a fight later on where I literally couldn't beat this boss and went, I don't know why I can't beat him. I've done so well. And then I realized, oh, there's a story mission I haven't done. I wonder if that's related. And like, and so like, and I just love that it's that kind of smart design where like, well, maybe you're dying for a reason. Maybe you don't have to hit your head against the wall.
Right.
And I'm curious for like the major story moments and for like a lot of the major characters, do you have a favorite line or a favorite moment that you got to put into the game, or like a thing that you're like, this is my legacy. This is my favorite thing I put in.
So I do. I don't know how to explain it without spoiling.
Okay, fair enough.
Stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of standout moments. So early on in the game, you meet this character Hans, who's
Handsome Hans.
Handsome Hans. Yeah.
Yes.
And it's funny because Mike wrote him in originally. He's Mike's character. He put him in the game. And as we were working on it, it was important to like keep him relevant. Like I wanted him to stay in it. And so there's some stuff later that it used to be that you could figure it out earlier. Now it's a little harder to find these lines I wrote for him, but it is the longest soliloquy in the game. It's like 25 uninterrupted lines long.
Wow.
And it's like the weirdest thing I've ever written. And you can only find it down, I think, the evil path. But like, yeah, that part with Hans I love a lot. And then also another one is, I guess I can say it I know how I can say it without spoiling it. In my mind, there is an ending that is the ending.
Right.
Right. And I was the one who got to make the call about the tone of that ending. And it's not exactly what you would think, probably. And that's intentional. Like it felt right for the game for it to resolve the way that it does. And my biggest contribution, I think, is that because I think in general, unless you're playing pretty methodically, I would guess that a majority of people will get that ending. And that's not an accident. Like, if you're playing a normal playthrough where you're not trying to shoot for a specific one, you'll probably end up on this one. And the tone of that was my call to make, and I'm pretty happy with it. It was a big deal to me that we did that, and I think it feels good.
All right.
I love that.
Very cool.
Before we wrap up, I would love to get a little bit into your gaming history. You know, you talk about working in and around games and taking a break, and you've already mentioned the grand sin of your favorite game being one of your favorite games being Zelda 2. But like,
of course,
do you have like an earliest gaming memory, like the first game you ever played or the first console you ever had, like that stands out to like the kinds of games that you continue to play after?
Yeah. So by my mom, I'm an only child, right? My mom and dad split when I was like basically born. And so growing up, like I was just me and my mom for a long time, but my mom had me pretty young too. And so when I was, let's say like 4, I could be off by a year or two because I was 4, I think. But my cousin Scott, who was like a friend of hers, you know, I mean, they're cousins, but they got along great. He was going to school in San Diego at SDSU. And he ended up living in our garage. Like we lived in like a house, my mom and I, and we had a converted garage. And so like, you know, my 20-ish-year-old cousin Scott, like with his NES and stuff, lived out in the garage. And so he taught me to play video games when I was like a little kid, because I didn't have an older brother, right? So he kind of filled that role of introducing me to video games. So there are photos of me earlier than I remember playing games, because there's like a picture of me at like 2 or 3 playing like a Commodore 64. And then I remember playing NES games with my cousin Scott pretty well, right? Like I remember my mom and dad, like I said, since they were split, he lived a state or 2 away. But for one birthday, for my 6th birthday, he surprised me by flying in, and that was the year I got an NES for my birthday. And it was like the same year, I think, that could be off, but I think it was pretty close to when Mario 3 came out, because like that's one of the games I got with it and stuff. So like those are like super formative, right? I still own that NES.
Sure.
Like I mean, I still own every console I've ever had. Actually, I never got rid of any of them. I've sold a couple of games, right? Unfortunately, over the years, there were times when a game was worth more money than I could justify not selling it at the time. But, you know, this is, I assume, I mean, you guys can see it, but for the audio only people, right behind me in my screen, I have about 800 RPG manuals.
Oh, yep. I'm so jealous. I didn't keep all of my strategy guides, and I wish I did. Like, I still have a couple, but like I miss those.
I sold so much of my video game collection in college when I was very, very broke. And I have been chasing that ever since. So
I sold instruments is what I did. And I'm glad, obviously it worked out for me, because it's easier to buy guitars than it is to buy retro games now.
Yeah, for sure.
So the fact that I didn't sell off, and I also got really lucky at a couple of points. Like, so when they brought out when they updated the model for the PS2, I had a PS2 for a while. And they were still, this was when, you know, Game Crazy, if anyone remembers Hollywood Videos.
Oh, yeah. Sure.
Game Crazy was like the attached kind of GameStop-ish kind of thing, right? Towards the end of, they used to sell retro games. Well, I mean, at the time, old games, I guess. Yeah. I don't know. But they used to sell games all the way back through like NES. And when they stopped keeping them in stock, they did this clearance sale where they were like, any 3 NES games you want for $10. Doesn't matter what game it is. No big deal. And they were still giving you like $80 in trade-in on a PS2. So I went in and was like, yeah, you guys can have this PS2. Let me get $80 at three games per $10 of NES games. And I like went home with like this huge stack.
2 dozen treasures.
Now it's probably just a ludicrous amount of games, right? Like I mean, I got like a copy of Final Fantasy in there, you know, like which.
Well, and I'm also a huge proponent of sometimes you don't have to get good games for cheap. Because I've definitely gotten $3, $5 games where I have more than gotten my money's worth out of it.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, whether just owning it, a conversation piece, or playing it for one afternoon.
There's only one NES game that I think is irredeemably bad. I own it. I've had it since I was a kid. It's like my mortal enemy, and it's Captain Planet for NES.
Oh my God, I remember that game.
Because it's just broken too. Yeah. Like, it's so bad that no one ever really got far enough into it, and then later through emulation they figured out like, oh, you can't beat this actually. Like, there's a game crash bug like 70% of the way through, and no one knew because it's too hard and no one got there.
Like, my irredeemable is Star Voyager. You want to talk about a game that doesn't tell you what to do or where to go or anything? You know what? Zelda 2, Castlevania 2 is hand-holding compared to that thing. So
really the worst part in Zelda 2 is like there's that part where you have to find a mirror, right?
Yes.
Like, and there's just no real hint where that's going to be. That's probably the most egregious, like, they'll figure it out. You're like, why? Why would we know that?
My White Whale NES game will always be the original Ninja Turtles game. Not because everyone gets to the dam and dies and no one beats it, right? You lose all your turtles there. But I had a friend when I was in college who got all the way to the Technodrome, which I didn't know was in the game till college. And then when he got to the Technodrome, he put the controller down and said, I'm not playing anymore. And I went, why? And he's like, oh, because I've gotten to this point 100 times and I died on Shredder 100 times and I'm done. If anyone else wants to play. I'm like, we scrambled to try and beat that game and we couldn't do it. But like, he just put,
so hard.
He was just like, I'm done. I have no, and like, I don't think I've ever YouTubed the ending of that game. I probably should, but like it exists in my mind as this thing that's just impossible to beat.
It's, you know, it's funny because like I'm arguably actually on the entire team, probably the biggest retro gamer too. Because like when we were working on it, one of the coders was like, hey, what should I play to like kind of understand it? I was like, here you go. Here's your homework. And, you know, like you guys have probably played Fexanadu, I'm assuming.
Oh yeah,
right.
Oh yeah. Oh, of course.
And you know about the necklace, right?
The
My
pendant,
favorite bug that exists.
Yeah.
Bugged pendant.
Yeah. We've talked about this one before.
If you pick it up, it makes the game harder.
Yeah,
it's
it makes
backwards.
you worse.
Where you start the game with what should have been given to you by getting the pendant. Since it's bugged, if you pick it up, it's like hard mode, which I think is very funny. And I did pitch like as a joke in Infernax where there should be an item that makes you suck more. So like if you pick it up, it's like, yeah, I just want like a harder run. But like, you know, so to answer your other question of like how long I've been into games, my first job was running an arcade too. I was an arcade technician for a long time.
Oh, wow.
That's why I have some, you know, machines out in the garage I've been working on. And yeah, so my whole life's been actually kind of gaming, which is really weird because I ended up in the games industry on accident. I went to school for commercial photography and I worked at Jinx, the clothing company, as their photographer. And then one day they put me in charge of marketing and it's been like 12 years since then or whatever.
Wow.
Yeah, so I didn't mean to do this, which I'm incredibly stoked about. But, you know, when you hear those people like, oh, did you know you wanted to make games from a young age? I've been playing D&D like my whole life. So, like, of course, storytelling and playing games is like always been. But no, I didn't think this is what was going to happen. Like, it was not the plan. It's been great, though.
Well, see, now that you've told me that you've played D&D your whole life, I want to know, is there going to be an official sealed door character builder like for D&D, like for 5e, where you can build him in the game?
No, you got to build him in one of the box sets, right?
Right,
like
exactly. There you go.
You got to play him in like the really old, like Moldvay Cook era basic D&D box. That's the only appropriate
He is a fighting man. He is not.
Yeah, exactly. You got to figure out what his damage is via attack matrix. There's no...
I never had to play with Faco, and I thank every day for
Oh, you sure? I did. It was great. It was wonderful. There was nothing wrong with it, I swear.
One of my best friends, we've grown up together. His older brother, like, he played 2nd edition with them, and I was just like, This sounds cool, but also I don't want to.
Yeah, THAC0 is a terrible... It's funny because, like, I own every edition of D&D all the way back to the white box, and... The game THAC0 weirdly was better than what existed before.
From my understanding,
because like I have a copy of Chainmail too, and it's the same thing, right? It's a super obtuse combat system. Like in the first early edition of D&D, it literally had like a supplement. It was basically a supplement to Chainmail, and it would be like for combat, buy Chainmail. Like it was like the book was just like, yeah, we don't have the rules for combat. Those are in the book for Chainmail.
There's a spreadsheet and some rulers. Stop crying.
Right, and THAC0 is like it's not that hard, but has anyone ever explained it to you?
Yes.
It's really dumb. Okay, yeah, because you got to subtract negative numbers sometimes, which is hilarious.
And lower numbers are better.
Right. And there's no reason for it. Like, they never really justified it. And, of course, like, 3rd edition came out, and then that's when they switched to the count up standard, which, of course, why would you not? Like, ascending armor class is the only thing that makes sense. Because they were still using... Well, and also back in the day, right, the 2nd edition, they had the split skill system and attack system where your skills were percentile based in a lot of cases, and then you were rolling d20s but counting down for ACs. It was a messy time.
Had so much math.
Yeah, it did.
Oh my god.
Yeah.
This is why I'm glad video games do the math for me on these things.
That's the thing about Baldur's Gate, right? Baldur's Gate uses
exactly.
THAC0. And it's not a big problem because you don't need to do that math. Like it's okay.
My only experience with it is Baldur's Gate, and I will keep it that way.
That's enough for you. You don't want... Yeah.
It's why it's Final Fantasy. The first Final Fantasy is in those list of games of like, sure, it's a legend, but it's also not a good game compared to current games. Like I know why
Dragon Warrior isn't a perfectly designed RPG.
It's like I have the nostalgia for some of these RPGs, but I tried to go back and play Final Fantasy 1, I think, on the Game Boy Advance version, and I just went... Like, I played it for a few hours and went, why do people like this game? I don't understand.
See, I do like it, but I like it for what it is. Of course I like it, right?
You've made a case for yourself. It doesn't sound that out of turn.
I'm a fan of the feelings it has, but it's not like well made, right?
No.
Like I would love... That's a game I would love to see, right? Is like the kind of Infernax treatment of a game like that. Because, of course, there's... But what I mean is... The scope of the game doesn't really change all that much because like a lot of modern reinterpretations of games like old Final Fantasy, they make them like a bunch. And like, that's not what I mean. Just make the parts of that feel really bad, feel less bad. And then make it the same, like you're on a quest, there's a dragon. Like it's fine. Yeah. But better where you're not grinding for like a million hours.
Exactly.
You know?
30 plus years of game development have given us some quality of life updates that people will say whatever they say. I say, don't go back.
Yeah.
There's a game developer who I'm a friend of named Damian Crawford, and they make some really cool wild games that are like just out. Like a lot of their stuff goes up on itch, but they have one called is it like my class is named Leader, so I convinced all of my friends to help me defeat the Dark Lord is like the name of one of the games.
I've seen a couple of those titles, and I love them.
Yeah. And they're all like really obtuse plays on like the formula of like RPGs. I haven't gotten to play through one before, but we've talked about them a bit. And of course, like I just love seeing that though. They work in RPG Maker and do like a lot of stuff, and they're a solo dev for the most part. And I just am like, that's what I like right there. Like definitely play with the expectations of like, oh yeah, it's impossible because you have 99 characters, so you have to go through each character's turn per combat turn, where it's like, all right, fight, magic, fight. It's great.
Get a sandwich, come back, maybe the turn's halfway done.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, to go back to Infernax, it's one of my favorite things about Infernax when I first played it at that PAX East in 2020 is when I jumped and could change direction in the air, I went,
oh, you like that? You're a fan of that?
I'm a fan. Yeah, I don't want to just endlessly go forward.
You know what there's not? Stairs.
You know, an interesting thing is like, of course, everyone on the team was very on board for air control, a thing that feels good to have. I would really love to hear someone emphatically defend Castlevania jumps. Like, I would love to hear them try and do it. Were you going to do it? You got it there?
I can do a little bit. I can say for the fact that if not necessarily the lack of air control, Infernax does enough of you hit the attack button, there's a little bit of a delay, having to time those things out. Mm-hmm. It feels enough of I'm not the first person to say this, but like OG Castlevania has very deliberate or deliberative design where you can't just run in mace blazing.
I think that's a thing you bang your head against too. You know, I was thinking about it, and it really changed my perspective on the idea of deliberate game design, where the first Tomb Raider is really actually a grid-based game. It's not really apparent because it's not visually represented, but your movements are all very deliberate because they're all in preset units, and those units are an unseen grid. So like you're basically playing a gridded platforming game. And once you think about it like that, you're like, oh, of course it's clunky, it's old and stuff, but that's what's going on. Just like in Castlevania, where like, yeah, there's a reason. I mean, the deliberate jumps is part of Castlevania. Not a super fun part of Castlevania for me, I guess.
I think it also would be something where I wouldn't necessarily defend it in Infernax, certainly not the way that it's currently designed. I am currently in, I think, the area that people were banging their head against to find, but I talked to NPCs, and I feel like the enemies I'm encountering, if I did not have air control, I would be cursing everyone's name.
Be having a bad day.
Names of people I've never met.
Yeah. I mean, there are definitely parts in the game where people bang their head against the platforming too. And like, that's fair at certain points in the game. You know, like not everything is a perfectly polished everything all the time. Some people find it harder than others, right? But overall, I would say that the feel of the movement really does take more from like Zelda 2 than it does from Castlevania. And
certainly the jump and everything,
Yeah, the jump is definitely not meant to be an homage to the gnarliness of the old Castlevania jump. And part of that's just, it didn't add to the flow of the game, right? Like it's already, so I was going to say it's funny because I've actually seen quite a few complaints on Steam by people being like, well, how come there's not a variable height to this jump? And like, well, part of that's because it's designed the way it's designed, right? Like all the platforming is designed for the timing challenge of like, how do you not hit those spikes? Well, it's about learning how to jump and then fall, right? Like I can understand. Exactly. And I can understand because that's a super common, right? Like most modern platformers have variable height jumps now. And I can understand it being frustrating to get used to, but it feels to anyone who's used to like what you're coming from, it feels quite generous, I think, the air control that you get.
And it's far more generous than absolutely no air control. And I think, actually, now that you've mentioned that, you're right. And that's a good compromise of that. It gives that same idea without it being obtuse or difficult just to give a big old middle finger.
Right. Yeah, there are definitely points of friction that are intentional in the design of the game, right? But I wouldn't say that there are anything that's specifically designed to be a middle finger, right? There are parts of friction where you're like, look, some people have criticized there are enemies that'll edge guard you. You know, that's kind of intentional sometimes. It's really annoying. That's the challenge, right?
But you can jump over those enemies. The first time I jumped over one of those enemies and hit him backwards into the lava, I was like, take that, fucker.
Right.
Or getting into a part where it's like, God, trying to deal with all of these enemies and like kill all of them is like, it is wrecking me. Just go past them. You don't have... Right. I know you get experience and gold, and grinding for experience and gold is like a drug to you, Geoff, but you can come back later. You are playing on classic mode and will lose all of that if you fall into the lava again.
I remember it used to be, because you can grind, right? That's another part of the game. And it's a pretty, honestly, I've done it myself manually. It's not that bad. I found a couple of parts where we had to actually patch the game because I was like, hey guys, I found a place where I can get too much XP, way too much XP.
You got to test those things.
Well, like one of the interesting things that did make it still into the game, right, is like on the XP, there's one character or one mob in the whole game who's like slightly higher than the rest of them in the XP scale, which is the skeleton warriors with swords.
Yes.
Right. They give you 250 XP. Like they have a lot of XP for that fight. Like it's like half of a boss fight.
Yeah.
You know? So like that's a lot of XP. So you can grind those dudes if you really want to, right? You just like weep, 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 weep. Like it doesn't take that long, because then I'm coming from Fexanity, where, you know, early on in the game there's the guy with shield and death, and the magic shield is like, hey, do you want to grind for 35 minutes in this to get it? And the answer is yes, every time, always. I absolutely always
Watching
do.
speed runs and playthroughs of Battle of Olympus is just that. I need all of the olives, and I will not do anything until.
Yeah, I mean, and that's a fair criticism of the power curve of Fexanity, right? Is that you probably shouldn't need that, and I do, so maybe I'm bad at the game. But like, I like that it's there. What a weird thing to do, right? To show you basically the ultimate items of the game in the very beginning, and if you just want to, you can buy them, right? Like they're not gated. Love that. Hilarious.
Yeah, it's earning your easy mode.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing too, right? Is that classic is hard, very hard. Casual is still pretty dang hard. There's only a couple of concessions to like the way that the game overall plays, so that if you beat it in classic mode, you beat the game. But if you beat it in casual, you basically beat the game too, right? Like the one thing that makes classic a lot easier, quote unquote, air quotes, is that there's like a mid castle checkpoint that you get in casual mode that's not there in classic. And that was because we like wanted to make it, that was one of the things we realized, right? Is like when you're learning the castle, if you're not confident and you're playing in casual mode, about halfway through is about as far as you're probably going to make it as you explore before you die and fall back. And like, we don't want people to bang their head against it forever, because especially if they're playing the casual mode. But you still have to do all the same stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like casual mode doesn't jump and attack for you or anything. So if you beat the game, like you input the patterns, right? Like you didn't, it's not a cheat code or anything. You beat the game. Like, so there's, I'm also not a fan of anybody making that seem like it's not an accomplishment too. You beat the game, right?
Right. Well, and as you said before, I think there's this idea that there's no such thing as cheat codes. It's all a shade of accessibility on some level, right? And
Sure. I mean, it's about fun too, right? Like I just don't understand the idea of being like, I'm sorry, but that would be too much fun. We're going to have to stop you right there.
Yeah.
You can't.
The age of infinity lives and unlimited resources in gaming. Like, I love, like, the stuff you could accomplish in the StarCraft story mode with power overwhelming and, you know, all of the other cheat codes that gave you unlimited resources. Like, I would just make Zerglings till I maxed out the unit count of Zerglings and then just send them places and watch them.
It's just fun.
Terrorize.
It does sometimes feel like, and I'm glad to see that the tide is it really seems to be turning on that sentiment. Because like, you know, I like a good challenge. I played a lot of games when I was younger that were just incredibly hard. And I think it's interesting because we're not the first generation to get old with games, but we're the first generation to kind of get old that grew up super deep in games, right? Like,
I think you're right, yeah.
And I think that, I mean, of course, because there are older gamers. Like, that's what I mean by being like, it's not just us, of course.
Post-Crash,
like, Sure, yeah, we're that's a good one. Yeah, we're post-Atari Crash as a generation. And, like, the thing about that is that everyone's probably going to need accessibility eventually. Like, it's a really, really short-sighted view to be like, well, my reflexes are still super good. You're like, well, hopefully you end up getting old, right?
You should be so lucky.
And yeah, if you're lucky enough to become an old person, you might want accessibility, because I'm only 35 and I'm not as good at a lot of games as I was when I was 15. Of course, that's not having as much time to dedicate to them, but also at the same time, like, your reflexes do slow down over time somewhat, or your amount of, why would you not want to progress to where, like, my dream is to see, like, I play a lot of Warhammer, right? I want to see retirement homes with like terrain and like gaming tables, so you can, right? Because like, why not? It'd be cool. Like you and your other nerdy friends can play together. Like, why wouldn't you want the next version of Smash to have cool accessibility features so that you guys can have like a sweet inter-retirement home Smash competition with like, okay, we're going to put on slow mode because everyone has arthritis and like we got to... That'd be great. I want that. I don't...
No, absolutely. But accessibility is also as much of a thing of... Yeah, why invite certain frustrations and challenges just because? Why not let the text be adjustable in font size? Why not?
Oh man, that's my personal crusade because I just can't. And it sucks because I'm sympathetic to the fact that like indie teams especially, part of why you see so much of that now, right, is that Unity has made it really easy, well, not easy, but much more accessible for smaller teams to port to other platforms. And if you designed it on a monitor like we're talking on right here, you're like, this is great text. And then you throw it on your TV 10 feet away, and you're like, I can't read any of that. Yeah. And you, of course, it's hard because accommodating text changes has to start at the beginning because then accommodating it via UI, all the UI elements it's a huge burden, right? Infernax gets away with not having to worry about that because our text is just huge.
Gigantic, big and blocky.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, but I also love this idea of like getting older and playing games. Like I've been streaming the Kirby franchise because I'm very excited for Forgotten Land. I'm a diehard Kirby. Like he's one of my favorite Nintendo characters. So I went back on the NES Online and played the original version of Kirby's Adventure, which is the second game, but it was the first game on Nintendo.
Right.
Yeah. I remember I replayed the Game Boy version. I have it on my 3DS and breezed through it. It's a half-hour play. It's really easy. Right. It's really fun. And so when I got to the Nintendo game to play on stream, I was like, oh, this is going to be really easy. Like this was a Nintendo game. It was fine. And I bashed my head against some of those bosses. I beat it on stream, but like that and Kirby Superstar, I was surprised how difficult they are because Kirby is known for being kid-friendly and much easier now. But like... on the
Nintendo Hard was a thing for a reason, right?
It was.
I just went back recently and played Ninja Gaiden for the first time in a really long time, 1 and 2. Nice. And I loved The Messenger. What a great game.
Oh, incredible.
It kind of ruined Ninja Gaiden for me, though, because while playing Ninja Gaiden, I'm just like, I love this game. It's beautiful. And for its time, it kicks ass. It doesn't feel very good compared to The Messenger, for instance. Yeah, because The Messenger's movement is awesome, right? It feels great. Yeah. And I was like, wow, it's such a wild thing to do. Because then you have other games where like the only other game I know of that intentionally borrows elements from Zelda 2 was it Panzer Paladin, which came out like while we were finishing up. And I thought it was a neat game, but I did find problems with it. Like it had some platforming stuff for me where, and maybe it's just me, but like your sprite didn't quite line, like all the platforms, they didn't have one thing in Infernax that you do have is there's a pretty generous coyote time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like a pretty generous amount of like jumpable off the ledge stuff. And that's intentional because the platform is already pretty hard. So like, yeah, Panzer Paladin had some real pixel exact jumps. And I died to death pits in that game more than, and not even like platform death pits, just like a pit. And I just fell into it a bunch of times. And I was like, wow, that's such a shame. Because literally if this platform was about 2 pixels wider, I would think this game's amazing. But as it stands, I just keep being like, why do I keep
To be fair, most of my most hateful deaths in Castlevania 2 were falling into the water in towns.
Right, where you're not even like, no stakes. No one's attacking you, but you're just dead.
You tripped on the tree root outside your home and died a horrible death.
Right.
So dignified.
I'm glad you brought up The Messenger, though, because that's one of those games where I don't think it was difficult. Like, to me, because I got so in the flow of the movement.
Sure, yeah.
But I went on a podcast to talk about it, and I was the only one who beat that game. And everyone's like, it was too hard. And I went, that's not possible. I suck at games, and I beat it. What do you mean it's not? But it's what you're talking about. Like, I grew up playing Ninja Gaiden, but could never beat it because it was 2 pixel perfect. And then I got The Messenger, where I have this, like, float space, and like, oh, this is perfect. This is exactly what I want.
Messenger it's such a masterpiece of game design. It's funny because like so Thierry, the director of it from Sabotage, who's from Quebec too.
Yeah.
When Berserk would have our yearly hangout, we'd actually invite a lot of our friends' studios, and Sabotage would come, and then Chainsaw Awesome, the guys who made Night Squad, and the developers of Kona, Parabola Studios. Like there's a bunch of, we're all friends. It's a small scene. But Terry and I would, because of course we would like be drinking like whiskey and stuff, and then get into an argument of, well, which one do you think is better, Ninja Gaiden or Zelda 2? Which is like a brutal argument, right? How do you like...
Which of really these nightmares are worst nightmares?
Right. And like, of course, and I mean, an interesting thing about like getting older is going back and realizing that The first half of Mega Man 2 is a good game.
You're correct. The minute you get to Wily's Castle, it's not a good game anymore.
The music's
right,
great.
because there's a point in it where you're like, wow, this is actually just objectively bad, where there are some fail lock states, right?
Yeah.
Where you can not have any more of the item you need to beat a certain part of the castle, and you'll never get any more of that item. And so you have lost, but you still have like 7 lives left.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the worst feeling I've ever, I just got there recently and was like, I forgot about this, like, incredibly disappointing moment, right? That should never happen. You should never have more lives than have already failed, because then it's like, all right, walk to your death, like walk to your failure. Now you have to die slow before the game will reset.
And that's the thing that we don't have to go back to. But if you want,
no, let's not bring any of that back, please.
Unless it is a specific option, because there are there's the Steves of the world that are going to want that.
There's nothing wrong with putting masochism in a game for the people who want the game to be really, really hard. Just let those of us who can't handle it like live in their wake, right? Like, I'm just here to have a good time.
I don't need to play hardcore mode to like champion hardcore mode.
Yeah, no, I'm super into like, because you can make his game as hard as you want. Someone is going to be like, wow, you should have made it harder. Well, you can't make the game for that.
I'm going to beat it on a dance pad now.
Right, exactly. Like, I mean, I remember and who knows, maybe they'll let me, integrate it later, is I was like, I bet you someone's going to be really, really good at Infernax pretty quick. And they're going to be bummed out that there's no like more challenging way to beat the game. And I was like, I want a mode where you never get to upgrade your armor. You only ever get 1 hit point. That's it. You're just wearing a loincloth, no armor. Got to play the whole game with 1 hit point. Someone could probably beat it. The gamers are crazy.
Ghosts and goblins, that shit.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, I just want that, because no one will be able to ask for a harder mode then, because you're like, it doesn't really get any harder, man. It's like everything is 1 hit kill. You have 1 hit point. Good luck. Like, that'd be awesome. Like, for that person, right? That's who it's for. Not for me. I'm never going to beat that. There's no way.
Nope. It's like they announced that mode for Metroid Dread that they're patching in that, and like an easier mode as well. They're also adding a 1-death kill mode.
You got it, right? Like, someone out there wants that.
Cool.
Somebody wants.
Someone's going to do it, and I'm going to watch them do it on stream and be amazed, and I'm never going to try myself. Literally,
I've never seen a skill ceiling truly in a game, right? Where you're like, every time you think it couldn't possibly be any more impressive, it's like, oh, well, someone beat that hit kill death mode. And you're like, yeah, but like you said, like, oh, some guy beat it with a dance pad, and it's like, oh yeah, some guy beat it with a TI-86 calculator through a mirror, like while upside down, like doing crunches. And you're like, what? Yeah. Like, how do you what?
Yeah, well, sure. As somebody who was absolutely the target audience for Infernax as it came out, thank you very much for all of it, and thank you for being here today.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you, Hunter. I'm a diehard fan of this game. There hasn't been a game I've already looked forward to playing again to see the other stuff in a while till this game. And so like I'm already planning my evil mode that's going to kill me. I might stream my evil mode because I feel like then at least the audience will be with me.
Right. You need someone to cheer you on from behind to be like, hey, remind me I have to stay evil, everyone.
I have to be a terrible person. But thank you for joining us. This was wonderful. We'll have to bring you back again sometime to talk more about writing and difficulty in games, since it's clearly something you're passionate about. Why don't you tell folks, A, where they can find Infernax, and B, where they can find you and all that you do out on the interwebs?
Yeah, so if you want to find Infernax, first you can just go to our Twitter for the game, which is INFERNAX, Infernax, just add Infernax. You can follow Berserk Studio on Twitter as well. It's spelled BERZERK, Berserk Studio, no S, at Berserk Studio on Twitter. We have websites for all of our stuff, which will come up, but those are the 2 most active places usually, is our studio and game Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Bond, B-O-N-D, hunterbond.com, just like it sounds. Or, I mean, well, that's my website, but Bond Hunter Bond on Twitter. And yeah, it's hard to keep it straight. It's my name just everywhere. It makes me easy. But yeah, you can find us mostly on Twitter. We do have Facebooks. We have, we have our own studio Discord. If you want to look up for Berserk's Discord, that's where people kind of congregate. But those are the main ones. Yeah.
Awesome. And go buy Infernax. If you are a fan of Castlevania games, if you are a fan of action platformers, this game is absolutely for you. I haven't been this into an indie game in a long time, and I'm really excited to see it through to the end and vanquish evil. You can also find us all over the internet at Fun and Games Pod in most places. Folks, if you are listening, tell us and tell Hunter, how you feel about Infernax. What do you love? What is the most gruesome and horrifying death you've had? Because there are a ton of really great death animations in that game.
There's good ones.
My favorite is just the drowning one, because it's literally like you're losing just the slow death that you've experienced so many times in Castlevania, walking into a pit. It's like,
yep.
Gotta love those. But tell us what you think of the game. Tell us what other kinds of retro stuff you love to see, what kind of accessibility you love to see. We always love hearing from all of you.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, on Twitter, Gmail, Fun and Games Pod. You can also go to certainpov.com to find more episodes of this show and other fantastic podcasts on the Certain POV network, as well as a permanent invite link to Certain POV's Discord, where we talk about games, comics, movies, music, all kinds of things and intersections therein, and we'd love to field questions there as well, and continue posting screenshots from our playthroughs of Infernax.
All right. Also, we should state, because it's official as of this recording, it's been official for a little bit, Geoff and I will be at PAX East 2022. As long as the world doesn't catch fire again, we will be there. We're pitching plant panels. We've got a lot of big plans, and so we hope to see all y'all there. If you're going to be there, please hit us up.
Yeah, and also don't forget to leave a rating or review on your podcast platform of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, anywhere therein. Doesn't have to be anything long, but it helps this show get noticed by people and moves this conversation forward. And we love hearing from you and putting that out there, because this is a conversation. Thank you for being a part of it. I'm Geoff Moonen.
And I'm Matt, a.k.a. Stormageddon.
And happy gaming.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't Screen Beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not.
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans.
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
She will be mine.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.